The first thing I noticed wasn't the noise, or the lights, or the way 40 people laughed like they'd never worried about money a day in their lives. It was the empty chair. It sat there between my wife and my mother-in-law, pushed in neatly, napkin folded, untouched. Too clean. Too deliberate. Like it was waiting for someone who wasn't allowed to sit down yet. I told myself not to overthink it. I've spent most of my adult life doing exactly that, swallowing discomfort, smoothing edges, convincing myself that keeping the peace was the same thing as being strong. But my chest tightened anyway. This wasn't just a dinner. This was my mother-in-law's birthday. 65. A milestone. The kind of event where nothing is accidental. The kind of night where appearances matter more than people. Her house looked like it belonged in a magazine. Glass walls. Marble counters. Soft yellow lighting that made everything feel warm and expensive. Waiters in black moved silently between guests, refilling glasses before anyone had to ask. Laughter floated through the room in practiced bursts. I stood there holding a gift I couldn't afford, wondering how many hours of my life it cost me. My wife was already seated. Perfect posture. Perfect smile. She squeezed my hand once before letting go, like a polite reminder that I was here, but not too much. I scanned the table again. No small legs swinging under the chair. No quiet humming. No impatient fingers picking at the edge of a plate. My daughter wasn't there. I leaned closer to my wife and lowered my voice. Where's she sitting? She didn't look at me. Just adjusted her napkin. She's around. Around. That word landed wrong. I tried again. She should be here by now. Before my wife could answer, my mother-in-law spoke from the head of the table. She didn't raise her voice. She never had to. She's helping, she said, smiling as she lifted her glass. It builds character. A few guests chuckled politely. I forced a smile that didn't reach my eyes. Helping. That was the word she used for everything that made her feel generous and powerful at the same time. I sat down slowly, the chair heavier than it should have been. As conversations restarted around me, stock tips, vacations, renovations, I felt that familiar shrinking sensation. The one I hated. The one I'd learned to live with. I wasn't poor. Not exactly. But compared to them? Compared to her? I was tolerated. My mother-in-law had paid for half this house. She'd helped with our wedding. She'd floated us loans she never asked back for, out loud, anyway. Every favor came with invisible strings. Every kindness had a cost. And I paid it by staying quiet. I glanced toward the kitchen. The door was cracked open, light spilling onto the dark hallway like a warning. Something wasn't right. I excused myself, murmuring something about the restroom. No one stopped me. No one cared. The hallway felt colder, quieter. The laughter faded with every step. As I got closer to the kitchen, I heard the sound. Water. Running. Steady. Endless. My pace slowed. I don't know what I expected. Maybe nothing. Maybe that's what scared me. I pushed the door open. The light inside was harsh, fluorescent. It buzzed softly. The counters were stacked high with plates and glasses, evidence of a party that had already decided who mattered. And there she was. My daughter stood on a small wooden stool, barefoot. Her toes curled around the edge, knuckles white as she balanced. The sink was too high for her. Her arms were stretched forward, sleeves rolled past her elbows, hands submerged in cloudy water. She flinched when she noticed me. Daddy. Her voice was small. Careful. I felt something crack inside my chest. What are you doing? I asked, already knowing the answer. She looked down at the dishes instead of at me. I'm almost done. Almost done. I stepped closer. The floor was cold. I noticed her feet first. Then her hands, red, pruned, trembling slightly. Why are you doing this so late? She swallowed. Grandma said I can't go back until it's done. I didn't speak. I couldn't. She rushed to fill the silence. It's okay. I'm being good. But the word hit harder than anything else. How long have you been here? I asked. She shrugged. Since cake. Cake had been over an hour ago. I crouched down so we were eye level. Sweetheart, are you tired? She nodded, then quickly shook her head, like she was afraid of the wrong answer. Grandma said servants don't get tired, she whispered. They just work. The room went very quiet. I don't remember standing up. I don't remember breathing. I only remember taking her hands out of the water. They were freezing. Her eyes filled with tears when she realized I wasn't smiling. Am I in trouble? She asked. That question will haunt me for the rest of my life. I wrapped her in my arms, right there in that bright, unforgiving kitchen. She clung to me like she'd been waiting for permission to stop pretending she was okay. No, I said, my voice breaking. You didn't do anything wrong. I looked around the room, the piles of dishes, the empty space, the quiet, and something inside me finally snapped into focus. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a system. I lifted her off the stool and set her down. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, embarrassed by the tears. Can I go back now? She asked softly. I took her hand. Yes, I said. You can. We walked back toward the dining room together. With every step, my heart pounded harder. Not with fear. With clarity. I knew the moment I opened that door, something would change. I just didn't know how much it was going to cost me. And for the first time in a very long time, I didn't care. I didn't plan to confront anyone that night. I planned to sit quietly, smile when spoken to, leave early, drive home with my daughter asleep in the back seat and tell myself it wasn't worth starting something. That was the plan. But plans stop mattering the moment you see your child standing barefoot on a stool in the dark, trying to earn her place back into a room she never should have been pushed out of. As we walked toward the dining room, her hand in mine, I felt her grip tighten. She knew something was different. Kids always do. They feel shifts long before adults name them. Daddy, she whispered, Grandma's gonna be mad. I stopped walking. The hallway light cast our shadows long and thin against the wall. Mine looked taller than it felt. Hers looked smaller than it should have been. I knelt in front of her again, right there between framed photos of vacations we were never part of. Listen to me, I said, keeping my voice low, steady. You didn't do anything wrong. And you never have to earn your place with work. Not here. Not anywhere. She nodded, but I could see the confusion. That kind of sentence doesn't land all at once when you're young. It takes time. It takes proof. I squeezed her hand once more and stood up. When I pushed the dining room door open, the noise rushed back in like nothing had happened. Laughter. Clinking glasses. Someone telling a story that ended in applause. 40 people, and not one of them had noticed a child missing for over an hour. We walked in together. The conversations didn't stop immediately. They slowed. Curved toward us. My mother-in-law saw us first. Her smile didn't fade, it sharpened. There you are, she said brightly. All finished. My daughter looked up at me. That look nearly broke me. Yes, I said. My voice sounded unfamiliar. Quieter. Colder. She's finished. I pulled her chair out and helped her sit. Her legs didn't quite reach the floor. I noticed that. I noticed everything now. My wife finally looked at me. There was a question in her eyes. Not concern. Calculation. I sat down slowly, placing my napkin in my lap like this was still just dinner. Like the world hadn't tilted 5 degrees off its axis. For a moment, no one spoke. Then my mother-in-law laughed softly. You didn't have to interrupt the party. She likes helping. That word again. Helping. I stared at my plate. Untouched food. Expensive. Perfectly arranged. I thought about the way my daughter had said almost done. I thought about the word servants. Something in my chest rose up, not loud, not explosive. She's not helping, I said. The table went quiet. My wife's hand moved toward my arm, but she stopped herself halfway. Too many eyes. My mother-in-law tilted her head. Excuse me? I met her gaze. For years, I'd looked away first. Tonight, I didn't. She's not here to work, I said. She's here as family. A guest near the end of the table shifted uncomfortably. Someone cleared their throat. My mother-in-law smiled, thin and practiced. You're being dramatic. I nodded once. Maybe. But I won't be quiet. That was when I felt it. Not of her. of what would happen next. Because when you stop playing your role, the people who benefit from it don't clap. They punish. Dinner resumed, but it wasn't the same. Conversations avoided me now. My name disappeared from the air. My daughter ate silently, glancing up at me every few seconds like she needed confirmation I was still there. But I was also thinking about the times I'd laughed off jokes at my expense, about the loans labeled gifts, about how often my daughter had been helping when we visited. This wasn't new. I'd just finally seen it. After dessert, my mother-in-law stood to make a toast. She spoke about family, about gratitude, about knowing one's place. Her eyes flicked to me for half a second. The message was clear. When the applause ended, she approached our side of the table. "You embarrassed me," she said quietly, her smile still intact. I leaned back in my chair. "I protected my daughter." She exhaled sharply through her nose. "You're overreacting." "Am I?" I asked. She looked past me toward my wife. This is what happens when pride replaces gratitude. My wife didn't respond. That silence hurt more than anything else that night. We left soon after. In the car, my daughter fell asleep within minutes, her head tilted toward the window, her fingers still curled like she was holding onto something invisible. My wife stared straight ahead. "You shouldn't have done that," she said finally. I kept my eyes on the road. "I should have done it sooner." She shook her head. "You don't understand how things work." "I understand exactly how they work," I said. "I just don't accept them anymore." The rest of the drive passed in silence. At home, I tucked my daughter into bed. She stirred slightly as I pulled the blanket up. "Daddy?" "Yes." She opened one eye. "Thank you for coming to get me." My throat tightened. "Always," I said. I sat on the edge of her bed until her breathing evened out. Then I went into the living room and sat alone. The house felt smaller than usual, quieter. I knew what I'd done. I'd crossed an invisible line, the kind you don't come back from. And as I sat there, replaying the night over and over, my phone buzzed. A message. From my mother-in-law. It was short. "We need to talk." I stared at the screen for a long time. Because deep down, I already knew. This wasn't going to end with a conversation. It was going to end with a reckoning. I slept maybe 2 hours that night. Not because of noise. Not because of stress in the usual way. Because my mind wouldn't let go of a single image. My daughter on that stool. Bare feet. Red hands. Trying to earn permission to exist. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it again. And every time, the same thought followed. I let this happen. That truth sat heavy in my chest as morning came. The house was quiet. My wife had already left for work. No note. No message. Just absence. I made my daughter breakfast and watched her carefully as she ate. She was quieter than usual. Polite in a way that didn't belong to a child. "Do you have school today?" I asked. She nodded. I packed my bag already. Of course she had. When I dropped her off, she hugged me tighter than usual. Longer. "Are you mad at Grandma?" she asked. I crouched down so our faces were level. "I'm not mad at you. That's the only thing that matters." She considered that, then nodded and ran toward her classroom. I sat in the car for a long time after. My phone buzzed. A known number. I knew who it was before I answered. "You caused a scene," my mother-in-law said, skipping any greeting. "I stopped one," I replied. There was a pause. I could almost hear her smile tightening. "We need to meet," she said. "Tonight." I agreed before I could overthink it. That was my mistake. Or maybe it was the first right decision I'd made in years. The restaurant she chose was expensive in a quiet way. No prices on the menu. White tablecloths. Servers who spoke softly, like volume itself was a sign of class. She was already seated when I arrived. "Sit," she said, gesturing to the chair across from her. I didn't rush. For once, I let silence do the work. "You embarrassed me," she said again, like repeating it might turn it into a fact. I folded my hands on the table. "You humiliated my daughter." Her eyes narrowed. She was contributing. There was that word she hid behind. "She's a child," I said. "Not staff." She leaned back. You're overstepping. I almost laughed. Overstepping. As if protecting your child was some kind of social faux pas. You've always had a problem with gratitude, she continued. After everything I've done for your family. I felt the familiar pull of guilt. The old reflex. Apologize. De-escalate. Make it easier. Instead, I stayed quiet. Silence unsettles people who are used to control. You should think carefully about your next move, she said. Because actions have consequences. That was the moment. Not when she threatened me, but when she said it like she believed consequences only flowed in one direction. I looked at her. Really looked. And for the first time, I didn't see power. I saw fear. I stood up. She frowned. We're not finished. Yes, I said calmly. We are. I walked out without touching the food. That night my wife and I barely spoke. She avoided my eyes. I could feel her torn between loyalty and comfort. This didn't have to be a war, she said quietly as we got ready for bed. It wasn't, I replied. Until now. The next day, the first call came. Then another. Then another. Voicemails. Missed calls. Messages that started polite and slowly sharpened. By the fifth call, the number changed. A lawyer. He introduced himself smoothly, like we were old friends. This can all go away, he said. If you're reasonable. I hung up. That's when it hit me. This wasn't about dinner. It was about control. And I had just taken something from her she'd never planned to give up. My phone buzzed again. This time a text. If you continue this behavior, you will regret it. I stared at the words. Then I typed back. She is my daughter. That night, I stood in my daughter's doorway and watched her sleep. Peaceful. I made a promise then. Not out loud. Not for anyone else. No matter what this costs me, she will never stand on a stool for them again. And somewhere deep inside, I knew. The next time I spoke to my mother-in-law, it wouldn't be as polite. The retaliation didn't come with shouting. It didn't come with dramatic ultimatums or slammed doors. It came quietly. The morning after the lawyer's call, my phone didn't ring at all. No messages. No warnings. Just silence. At first, it felt like relief. Like maybe I'd imagined the tension. Like maybe standing up once had been enough. It wasn't. Silence, I learned, is how powerful people remind you they exist. I noticed it in small things first. The grocery card my mother-in-law had insisted we use, declined. The preschool tuition payment, returned. A casual message from my wife's brother asking if everything was okay, followed by a careful suggestion that I should apologize before things get complicated. Complicated. That word followed me all day like a shadow. I went to work and stared at my screen without seeing it. Emails blurred together. Numbers lost meaning. My mind kept circling the same thought. How much does dignity cost? Because whatever it was, I was starting to see the price tag. When I got home, my wife was already there. Sitting at the kitchen table. Hands wrapped around a mug she wasn't drinking from. They froze the account, she said without looking up. I set my keys down slowly. I figured they would. She finally met my eyes. There was fear there. Not anger. Fear. You can't just challenge her like that, she said. You know how she is. I know exactly how she is, I replied. That's why I did it. She shook her head. You don't understand what this could cost us. I sat across from her. I understand what it was costing our daughter. She flinched. That hurt to see. Because part of me wanted her on my side. Wanted her to say she saw it too. That she'd felt the wrongness all along. Instead, she looked tired. She's my mother, she said quietly. She helps us. No, I said. She controls us. The word hung between us. My wife stood up abruptly and walked away. Conversation over. That night, the house felt different. Smaller. Thinner. Like the walls were listening. I tucked my daughter into bed and read her favorite story. Halfway through, she interrupted me. Daddy. Yes, sweetheart. Did I make Grandma sad? There was. The guilt passed down like an inheritance. I closed the book and took a breath. No. Grandma made a bad choice. And adults are responsible for their own feelings. She nodded slowly, absorbing it in pieces. Will we still go there? She asked. I hesitated. I don't know, I said honestly. But wherever we go, you'll never have to work to belong. That seemed to satisfy her. She rolled onto her side and closed her eyes. I sat there long after she fell asleep. Because honesty, I was learning, comes with its own kind of loneliness. Over the next few days, the silence spread. Invitations stopped. Messages went unanswered. People who used to smile at me now offered tight nods, like association itself had become risky. My wife moved through the house carefully, like every step required calculation. We spoke about logistics, schedules, groceries. We did not speak about us. At night, I lay awake and ran numbers in my head. How long could I hold this line before it broke something I couldn't fix? That question scared me more than any threat. On the fourth day, a courier arrived. No return address. Inside was a neatly folded letter. Formal, polite, precise. It outlined concerns about my emotional stability. Suggested that my behavior at the party raised questions about my judgment as a parent. I read it twice. Then a third time. This wasn't just punishment. It was preparation. They weren't trying to scare me into apologizing. They were building a case. That night, my wife finally broke. She's talking to lawyers, she said, voice trembling. She thinks you're trying to turn our daughter against her. I leaned back in my chair. I'm trying to protect our daughter. She doesn't see it that way. I know. We sat there in the dim kitchen light, two people who loved the same child but no longer trusted the same truths. I need you to fix this, my wife said finally. Please. I looked at her. Really looked. For the first time, I realized how much of her identity was tied to comfort, to approval, to never rocking the boat. I can't, I said softly. Not the way she wants. Tears filled her eyes. Then what happens to us? I didn't answer. Because I didn't know. Later that night, my phone buzzed again. A new number. Another message. This time, it wasn't threatening. It was strategic. Let's resolve this privately. For the child. I almost laughed. Because that was the lie at the center of everything. This had never been for my daughter. It had always been about obedience. I set the phone face down and stared at the ceiling. The silence pressed in on me from all sides. But beneath it, something else was growing. Not anger. Resolve. If this was the cost of being a father instead of a guest in my own family, then I needed to decide how much more I was willing to pay. And whether I was finally ready to stop being quiet. The hardest part wasn't the money. It wasn't watching the numbers in our account drop lower each day, or calculating how many weeks we could stretch groceries if we stopped buying anything that wasn't essential. The hardest part was watching my daughter change. She stopped asking questions. That might not sound like much, but if you've ever been around kids, you know how loud curiosity usually is. It spills out of them. It demands answers. It's how they test the world. Now, she paused before speaking, like she was checking for permission. I noticed it one morning when she spilled milk at the table. I'll clean it, she said quickly, already reaching for a towel. Her voice wasn't panicked. It was practiced. I gently took the towel from her hand. Hey, accidents are allowed here. She looked at me, searching my face for the catch. There wasn't one. But damage like that doesn't undo itself overnight. At work, things weren't any better. My focus slipped. I missed deadlines. A supervisor pulled me aside and asked if everything was okay. I said yes. That was a lie. But it was the kind of lie men learn to tell early. The kind that keeps the lights on while something else quietly falls apart. The calls continued. Not threatening anymore. Friendly. Concerned. A family friend asking if I was doing all right. A cousin checking in out of love. A former colleague offering advice I hadn't asked for. Every conversation ended the same way. You should make peace. What they meant was submission. My wife started spending more time at her mother's house. She said it was to keep things normal for our daughter. But normal for who? Each time she came back, she seemed a little further away. Like she was translating between two worlds and slowly choosing the one that felt safer. One evening, she sat across from me and slid a piece of paper across the table. It was a list. Therapists, mediators, family counselors. I think it would help if you talked to someone, she said carefully. I scanned the page. None of the names were neutral. They were all connected. I'm not the problem, I said. She pressed her lips together. That's what scares me. That night, my daughter asked if she could sleep in my bed. I didn't ask why. She curled up beside me, her back pressed against my chest like she needed proof I wasn't going anywhere. In the dark, she whispered, "Daddy, are we in trouble?" I stared at the ceiling. "No," I said. "We're just changing." She was quiet for a moment. "Grandma says change is dangerous," she murmured. There it was again. The voice that wasn't mine. I rolled onto my side so I could see her face. "Listen to me. Change is how you grow. Anyone who tells you otherwise is afraid." She nodded slowly and closed her eyes. But sleep didn't come easily. The next morning, a thick envelope arrived. This one wasn't subtle. Legal letterhead. Language wrapped in politeness but sharpened underneath. Concerns about parental influence. Requests for documentation. A suggestion that mediation might be pursued in the best interest of the child. I sat at the kitchen table and read it twice. Then a third time. My hands were steady. My heart wasn't. This wasn't intimidation anymore. This was escalation. When my wife got home, I showed her the letter. She sank into a chair. "She wouldn't really try to take her," she said, more hope than conviction. "She doesn't have to," I replied. "She just has to make us afraid enough to comply." My wife covered her face with her hands. "I can't lose my mother," she said. I said nothing, because the truth sitting between us was too heavy to lift gently. I can lose everything else. That night, after everyone was asleep, I opened my laptop. I didn't look for advice. I looked for patterns. I read about power, about family courts, about how control often wears the costume of concern. And slowly, something shifted. I stopped asking how to make this end. I started asking how to stand. The next day, I made a decision I'd been avoiding. I called a lawyer. Not the kind my mother-in-law used. The kind who specialized in people like me. Fathers. When we spoke, he didn't rush me. He didn't interrupt. He listened. At the end he said, "You're not crazy. You're early." That sentence settled something inside me. For the first time since the party, I felt grounded. That evening, my daughter ran to me when I came home. "Daddy," she said, smiling wide, "I drew us." She held up a picture. 3 figures. And an empty space where someone else might have been. No stool. No sink. Just us, standing. I knelt down and hugged her tightly. This was the price of defiance. Not money. Not comfort. Clarity. And I was finally ready to pay it. By the end of the week, I stopped flinching when my phone rang. Not because the calls stopped. Because I finally understood what they were trying to do. Control doesn't always shout. Sometimes it dials. And again. And again. Until you answer just to make it stop. The lawyer called 34 times in 2 days. I counted. At first, the voicemails were courteous. Measured. Professional. He spoke slowly, like calm itself was a favor. Just trying to help everyone move forward. We'd hate for things to become unnecessarily difficult. Let's resolve this quietly. By the 10th call, the tone shifted. Subtle pressure wrapped in legal language. By the 20th, courtesy disappeared altogether. He stopped asking. He started informing. I didn't answer a single one. Instead, I listened. I learned how intimidation sounds when it wears a tie. At night, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open, legal tabs stacked like bricks. Custody statutes. Case summaries. Words like fitness and stability repeated until they lost meaning. I wasn't trying to become an expert. I was trying to become unafraid. My wife watched me from the doorway more than once. "You don't have to do this alone," she said one night. "I already am," I replied gently. She didn't argue. That scared me more than anger would have. The next morning, my daughter asked if she could walk to school instead of being dropped off. "I just want to feel normal," she said. Normal. I said yes and watched from the window as she walked away, backpack bouncing, shoulders still a little too tense for a kid her age. I promised myself something then. No matter how this ended, she would not grow up thinking love came with conditions. The lawyer called again at noon. Then at 12:07. Then at 12:15. On the 34th call, I finally answered. "Good afternoon," he said smoothly. "I'm glad you decided to be reasonable." "I didn't," I said. "I decided to listen." There was a pause. "Then listen carefully," he replied. "Your behavior raises concerns. Emotional instability. Poor judgment. Alienation." He let each word settle. I pictured my daughter on that stool. "I have documentation," he continued. "Witnesses. A pattern of behavior that could be interpreted as volatile." "Do you?" I asked. He hesitated. Just for a second. That was all I needed. "Because I have documentation too," I said. "And it tells a very different story." Silence. "You should speak to your counsel," he said finally. "I am," I replied. "Just not yours." I hung up before he could respond. My hands were shaking. But not from fear. From adrenaline. That afternoon, I met my lawyer in person. He wasn't impressive in the way my mother-in-law's lawyers were. No marble office. No assistant hovering nearby. Just a small room. A legal pad. And a man who looked me in the eye when I spoke. "She's used to winning before things reach a courtroom," he said after I finished. "People fold." "I won't," I said. He nodded. "Good. Then we prepare." We talked about records, timelines, text messages, patterns of behavior. For the first time, the chaos in my head began to organize itself. This wasn't personal anymore. It was structural. On the drive home, my phone buzzed again. A text this time. "We can still make this easy." I didn't reply. Instead, I stopped at a park. My daughter was there with a friend from school. Running. Laughing. Unburdened for a moment. She waved when she saw me. I waved back. Standing there, I realized something I hadn't before. They needed me to panic. They needed me reactive. Because a calm man with nothing left to lose is dangerous to systems built on fear. That night, my wife sat beside me on the couch. "I'm scared," she admitted. "So am I," I said. She looked at me then really looked. "But you're not backing down," she said. "No," I replied. "I'm standing up." She nodded slowly. Not agreement, but recognition. As I lay in bed later, my phone finally went quiet. No calls. No messages. Just silence. But this time, it felt different. Not like punishment. Like recalibration. Because somewhere between call number 1 and call number 34, the balance had shifted. They knew I wasn't afraid anymore. And I knew the next move wouldn't be made over the phone. It would be made face to face. The room was smaller than I expected. Not physically. Emotionally. A conference table. 3 chairs on one side. 2 on the other. A pitcher of water no one touched. Neutral walls designed to absorb conflict without taking sides. This was where things like love and power went to be translated into paperwork. I arrived early. That wasn't an accident. For most of my life, I'd walked into rooms already bracing for impact, ready to explain myself, soften my tone, apologize before anyone asked. Today, I wanted to feel the space before anyone else filled it. I sat down, placed my hands on the table, and breathed. My lawyer arrived next. He nodded once, no small talk. "You ready?" he asked. "I am," I said. And for the first time, I meant it without checking my fear first. When my mother-in-law entered, she didn't look at me right away. She never did when she thought she still had the upper hand. She was dressed impeccably. Controlled. The kind of woman who believed composure was evidence of truth. My wife followed behind her. That hurt. More than I expected. She sat closer to her mother than to me. Not dramatically. Just enough to signal where safety lived. I didn't react. That was new. The mediator introduced herself and began explaining the purpose of the meeting. Ground rules. Respectful language. Best interests of the child. I'd heard it all before. What I hadn't felt before was steady. When my mother-in-law finally spoke, her voice was soft, concerned. "This isn't about punishment," she said. "It's about making sure my granddaughter grows up in a stable environment." There was the word stable. She looked at the mediator, not at me. "I've noticed changes in her behavior," she continued. "Confusion. Anxiety. I worry she's being influenced by tension." Tension. A cleaner word than control. The mediator turned to me. "Would you like to respond?" This was the moment. Not the loud one. The real one. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't lean forward. I didn't perform. I spoke like someone stating facts they'd finally accepted. "My daughter is not confused," I said. "She's adapting." My mother-in-law's eyes flicked toward me. "For a long time," I continued, "she believed love was conditional. That her value came from being useful. That belief didn't come from me." My wife shifted in her chair. I felt it. But I didn't stop. "She's learning something new now," I said. "That she belongs without earning it. That adults are responsible for their own emotions. That home is a place she can rest." The mediator nodded slightly. My mother-in-law smiled thinly. "You're making accusations." "No," I said calmly. "I'm setting boundaries." That was the second time. The first time, I'd spoken out of instinct. This time, I spoke out of identity. "I won't allow my child to be used as leverage," I said. "Not emotionally. Not socially. Not legally." The room went quiet. My mother-in-law leaned back. "You're being dramatic." I shook my head. "I'm being clear." She turned to my wife. "You see what I'm dealing with?" All eyes shifted. This was the moment I'd feared most. My wife looked at me, then at her mother, then down at her hands. "I love you," she said finally, to her mother. "But he's right about one thing." My heart stopped. Our daughter shouldn't be afraid of disappointing adults. The words were quiet, but they landed hard. My mother-in-law's expression changed. Not anger. Calculation. The mediator cleared her throat and suggested a break. While they stepped out, my wife stayed seated. She didn't look at me. "I don't know how to live without her approval," she said. I didn't reach for her. That was another change. "I know," I replied. "But our daughter can't live for it." She nodded once. When the meeting resumed, the tone had shifted. Less confidence on one side. More caution. I spoke again near the end. Not defensively. Not emotionally. "I'm not trying to punish anyone," I said. "I'm trying to protect my child. That's not negotiable." I looked directly at my mother-in-law. She doesn't visit alone anymore. She doesn't perform for affection. And if those boundaries aren't respected, contact ends. My lawyer said nothing. He didn't need to. The mediator wrote notes. My mother-in-law didn't respond. For the first time, she didn't have a move. When it was over, we stood. No one hugged. No one smiled. My wife lingered behind as her mother left. "I didn't plan to say that," she said. "I know," I replied. She looked at me. Really looked. "You're different," she said. "I had to be," I answered. That night, I tucked my daughter into bed. She watched me closely as I pulled the blanket up. "Did I do okay today?" she asked. My chest tightened. "You never have to ask that," I said. "But yes, you did great." She smiled and rolled onto her side. As I turned off the light, I realized something. The second time I spoke, I wasn't asking to be heard. I was stating what would be. And that made all the difference. Victory didn't arrive with an apology. There was no dramatic phone call. No public acknowledgement. No moment where anyone admitted they were wrong. It arrived quietly, in the form of fewer messages. Longer pauses. Boundaries that were tested once, then not again. The calls stopped first. Then the suggestions. Then the reminders of everything that had been done for us. Silence returned, but this time, it wasn't a weapon. It was acceptance. Our life got smaller after that. Not in the way people usually mean when they say that. We stopped attending certain gatherings. Holidays became simpler. Fewer faces at the table. Less noise. More space. My daughter noticed it before I did. One Saturday morning, she sat at the kitchen counter drawing while I made pancakes. Sunlight cut across the room, catching dust in the air like it had something to prove. "Daddy," she said, not looking up, "it's quieter now." I flipped a pancake and smiled. "Is that good or bad?" She thought about it. "Good." I can hear myself think. I laughed softly. That laugh felt earned. She didn't wash dishes anymore. Not because she wasn't allowed. Because she didn't feel obligated. If she helped, it was because she wanted to. If she didn't, nothing changed. That was the difference. My wife took longer to settle into the new normal. She grieved in pieces. Sometimes quietly. Sometimes with frustration she didn't know where to put. One night, weeks later, she sat beside me on the couch and said, "I didn't realize how much of my life was spent managing her moods." I didn't say "I told you so." I just nodded. "That kind of control doesn't feel like control when you grow up inside it," I said. She leaned her head against my shoulder. It wasn't forgiveness. But it was movement. Work stabilized. I didn't get a promotion. I didn't suddenly become impressive. But I showed up differently. Clearer. Quieter. Less desperate to prove something. That changed more than I expected. The lawyer sent one final email. Neutral. No threats. No conditions. Just confirmation. I read it once, then archived it. I didn't save it. I didn't need to. One evening, as I was tucking my daughter in, she asked a question that stopped me cold. "Daddy," she said, "what does brave mean?" I sat on the edge of her bed and thought about it. Not the word. The cost. "Brave," I said slowly, "is when you choose what's right even if it makes your life harder." She nodded, satisfied. "Then you're brave," she said, already turning onto her side. I sat there long after she fell asleep. Because that was the moment. Not the meeting. Not the confrontation. Not the silence afterward. That was the win. I lost access to comfort. I lost approval. I lost the illusion that keeping the peace was the same as keeping my family safe. But I kept my daughter. I kept my voice. And I kept something I didn't realize I'd been missing until it returned. Respect. Not from them. From myself. Sometimes I think back to that night. The empty chair. The stool. The 6 words that changed everything. I understand now why it didn't feel heroic in the moment. Real courage rarely does. It just feels necessary. And if I had to choose again, between silence and discomfort, between obedience and protection, I wouldn't hesitate. Because some things aren't meant to be negotiated. Your child's dignity. Your voice. And the moment you decide who you are.